kind of, theoretical question, peripheral question, but it does require us to think again about what we've been saying and see how some of it has to be adjusted. Does Hashem have free will? Does Hashem have free will? Well, let's start with the definition that we gave of free will. What does free mean when we talk about free will? We said it means free from external causation. To say that anyone or anything has free will means at least some of the things that it does, so to speak, on its own, not the result of external causation. Now, if I raise that question about the Creator, I think it's a no-brainer. External causation that would cause him to do something? That's just off the books. Nothing would have the power to make him do something. Even though it's true that what he does might be in terms of what we do, it's not as if that what we do has no relevance to what he does. Let's take, for example, reward and punishment. So we are told, if you do a mitzvah, then he will give you a reward. If someone does a transgression, then he, Hashem, will give him a punishment. So it's true that what Hashem does, at least sometimes, is according to what we do. But it isn't true that what we do causes him to do what he does. The fact that what he does tracks what we do is because he's decided to do it that way. He's decided to run the world that way. Since he's decided, and he's publicized the fact that he will provide reward for doing mitzvahs and punishment for doing averos. So then, when a person does a mitzvah, he knows that Hashem will respond by giving him a reward because Hashem has announced that that's his decision for how the world should run. It's not us causing Hashem, it's rather us triggering a condition which Hashem himself chose. So, if we talk about freedom of the will, mean free from external causation, it seems obvious that the Creator is free from external causation. Mm-hmm.
Even though he's free and he's not really bound by it, but he has certain attributes that we say that he has.
I'm coming to that. Very good, very good. But then there's another way in which we described free will, and that was choosing between alternatives. That's where the problem of foreknowledge came from. The way we describe free will is, let's say, for a person, and there are two alternatives, A and B, and he could do A and he could do B. And only his choice determines which one will happen. Both A and B are in his power. And then when God's foreknowledge seemed to knock out the other one that he didn't do, we were worried about that. And we said, well then, it's not leaving free will because you're not choosing between two alternatives. So let's try out that description on Hashem. Does Hashem choose between two alternatives? Two or more, but let's just make it simple. Two alternatives, each one of which is possible for him, and then it's only his choice that realizes one rather than the other? Let's make this brutal by choosing the most central type of decision, a choice between good and evil. Does Hashem have the free will to choose between good and evil? Which would mean the good action, the good outcome is possible for him, and the evil action and evil outcome is also possible for him. They're both within his power, and only his choice makes it that one happens rather than the other. Do we really understand Hashem as having the ability to do evil? I don't think so. I think our understanding of Hashem, and this is what's described in the sources, in the central sources, is that everything about Hashem is necessarily so. Nothing's accidental. Nothing could have been different. His existence is necessary. The idea of his non-existing is an impossibility. And his goodness is necessary. The idea that he could have been evil or could be evil if he chose to do so is simply not accepted. If that sounds like a limitation on his power, in a certain sense of power, it is a limitation. But our conception is that the power that he has is the power of absolute perfection, which is the power of absolute goodness, not the power to be bad. Indeed, it's the weakness of human beings that they have the capacity to be bad. It's one of the things that the angels look at human beings and say, Baruch Hu, why have you chosen them? Why do you shower them with your presence and with the centrality of your creation when they have this horrible weakness of possibly doing evil? And there are answers to that question. But the bottom line is absolute perfection, absolute wholeness, absolute success doesn't leave open the possibility of doing evil. Another way to see this point, something I've mentioned before, if you want to know what is absolutely good, ask what will there be in the world to come. The world to come has all goodness in it and only goodness in it. So if you have something in this world and you're wondering, is this thing in this world an absolute good, an intrinsic good, or maybe it's just a means, it's just a way to get something else, but it doesn't have absolute goodness itself, ask yourself, will that thing be in the world to come? If it has absolute goodness, then it's got to be in the world to come. That's a place where you have all and only goodness. Well, do we picture our presence in the world to come together with the possibility of our doing evil in the world to come? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There's no free will in the world to come. Which means that even free will isn't absolutely good, intrinsically good. It's only a means. So Kadosh Baruch Hu, all the more so, the possibility of doing good isn't there. So can we describe Kadosh Baruch Hu as choosing between alternatives? It doesn't seem so. So now we see that the two descriptions that we gave of free will, one free from external causation, and the other choosing between two possible alternatives, aren't the same. Because here you have a case, Kadosh Baruch Hu, where the one applies and the other does not. For those who know the literature, my apologies to Harry Frankfurt, who used this in an entirely different context, the PAP, Principle of Alternative Possibilities, and he argued against it. He didn't apply it to the Creator. But I think the idea does apply to the Creator, and here's where you see that the two descriptions come apart. Well, if the two descriptions come apart, we have to do something. If both descriptions are true, if both descriptions are essential, then if you lose one of the descriptions, it seems you've lost something important. With respect to Hashem, we've lost the description of choosing between alternatives. So you now might ask yourself, do we really think that Hashem has free will? I think it's a good question. I think it's a fairly deep question. I have something to say about it. I'm not satisfied that it gets to the bottom of everything. I think maybe there's some loose threads left over. But I think I can make progress on it. I want to stick with the original definition. Free will means free from external causation. And then, of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is completely free from external causation. I think with human beings, to achieve freedom from external causation requires a kind of engineering job. There's a big threat to free will for people, and that threat is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running the world. He created the world, he constantly gives the world its existence, and he's running it. Naively, at first glance, you could wonder, well, if he's running the world, he's making everything happen. If he makes everything happen, there's no room for me to make something happen. That would mean whatever motions and performances come out of this body would also be something that he makes happen, like he makes the wind blow and like he makes the birds fly. And then everything that comes out of me would be the result of external causation, God's causation. If that's true, we don't have free will by the first definition, because everything that we do is only God's causation making it happen. So the problem here is to describe Hashem as running the world and still make room for our own contribution, which isn't the result of his causation. When in running the world, so to speak, Kodesh Baruch Hu has to leave a section open where he doesn't dictate what will happen. He doesn't make things happen in that section. He leaves it open for us to make things happen. Okay, now how's that going to work? How is it going to be that we make things happen? After all, he creates us. And he creates us with all our abilities, with our whole psychology. So how are we going to engineer this open space where it's our decision that makes something happen? See, here, I think the idea of choosing between alternatives is the engineering answer to that question. In fact, I think I have a passage in the Way of God by Lutzato, which says this almost word for word. How are you going to engineer that open space? Well, first of all, Kodesh Baruch Hu can't put his stamp on it and say, this is what happens. He does that, then he's making it happen. But what's the mechanism by which we make things happen? The mechanism is this. You come to a certain position, and in that position, the whole of God's causation doesn't determine what will happen. If it doesn't determine what will happen, that has to mean there's more than one possibility. If there's only one possibility, and that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu built into the world, there's only one possibility, then it's his causation that made it happen. So there's only one way to make sure that his causation isn't going to make it happen. That is to say, take the sum total of all of his causation. In this spot, all that causation doesn't determine what will be there. If it doesn't determine what will be there, then there have to be alternatives. Okay, and now we're the ones who are going to determine which of those alternatives comes true. That's how we act in a way that isn't forced by Hashem's causation. And then you have the conflict between, let's say, a choice between good and evil, and both of them are open, both of them are not closed, both of them we're capable of doing, and then it's our choice that makes the outcome. That's how we are able to behave in a way that isn't smothered by HaKadosh Baruch Hu's causation. But that's not the definition of free will. That's just how are we going to engineer for creatures in a world that's run by the Creator, how are we going to engineer for that creature acting without external causation forcing. So I want to say that the idea of choosing the alternatives is definitely true for us. When we exercise free will, that's what we're doing. We're doing that because otherwise it would all be done by God's causation. But the choice between alternatives is the way in which we act free of God's causation. And for Hashem, his freedom is that he acts free of causation external to him. And that, given that he's the Creator and he's all-powerful in a certain sense, that's an obvious conclusion. So I think that he does have free will, and I think that the problem of choosing between alternatives isn't a challenge. Even though he can't choose between alternatives, it isn't a challenge to his free will. Are we together so far? I don't think this is easy, but I think it does at least part of the job. Okay, now, that leads, I'm still following up on what you said, because I think what you said was very, very important. That leads to the question, what about us, when we talk about having two possibilities open, both possible for us, and both within our power, what about inner barriers to our power? What about inner barriers? Now here's something that people say, and we're going to have to work on it into some detail to make sense out of it. For example, take a person who smokes, and could be that he's addicted to smoking. One of the things smokers say is, I really don't want to smoke. I just can't help it. Now, not everything that people say is meaningful. Sometimes they're just confused. But let's take this phraseology, let's take these words, and see if we can make some sense out of it. I really don't want to smoke. I just can't help it. Now I am working with another part of Harry Frankfurt. Let's start simple and see what we have to do to answer problems. He says, I really don't want to smoke. Suppose we say to him, what are you talking about? Why are you smoking? Isn't it because you really do want to smoke? In fact, you really want to smoke so badly that you can't control that desire? Isn't the truth that you really do want to smoke? What do you mean you really don't want to smoke? If you really didn't want to smoke, you wouldn't be smoking. Nobody's forcing you. You will describe it as having an uncontrollable desire. Good, that's right. If you have a desire to do something, it means you want to do it. So there's a problem here. What could he possibly mean? Now, we'll answer the question in stages. Stage one, part of it could be, yeah, sure, he has a desire to smoke, but he also has a desire to stop smoking. He has both of them. He's conflicted. He's ambivalent. He's in turmoil. Let's say he's become convinced that smoking is bad for his health, or he has a personal relationship which is interfering with. He wants the cigarette, and he also wants to not smoke the cigarette. He wants both. I mean, that happens to people all the time. They have one desire for, one desire against. Okay, but we could still ask, so you have a desire to smoke and a desire not to smoke. Why do you call one of them real and the other one not? Why do you say, I really don't want to smoke? So you have to say, you got two on the table, desire to smoke, desire not to smoke, and you say, yeah, there are two desires on the table, but only this one's real. So what's the other one, not real? Why are you smoking if it's not real? So we didn't get there yet. Now, Frankfurt's suggestion is that we understand that there's another level. There's a million, but at least two that we can describe and work with. Two levels of desires. There are desires for things and activities, experiences, events. And then we have desires about our psychology. What kind of person we are, what kind of motivations we have. Let's imagine a person who gets angry. So when he's feeling the urge to burst out in anger, and that of course is a tremendous desire to express that anger, and somebody says to him, I'm going to stop talking to you if you burst out in anger. So he says, okay, so I don't want to burst out. And he's conflicted. But there's another part of him which says, I wish I weren't like this. I wish I didn't have this urge, this impulse to be angry. I wish I were a calmer person. That's a different kind of desire. That's not a desire to yell or desire to not yell. It's a desire to be a different kind of person. Frankfurt calls these meta desires. Meta means just one level up. The desires for your own psychology. You desire to be a different kind of person. And we do have those kinds of desires, and there are many self-help programs where people are offered strategies for changing the kinds of desires that they have. Now, so let's take this guy, the smoker. Desire to smoke, desire not to smoke. But one level up, he has the desire to lose the desire to smoke and to reinforce the desire not to smoke. One level up, there's no conflict. One level up, there's pure anti-smoking. So now, first step in the solution. Now we could say, when he says, I really don't want to smoke, he's talking about the second level. On the second level, there's only anti-smoking. Whereas on the first level, there's both pro-smoking and anti-smoking. So maybe really applies to the second level. That would give it a place where it picks out something that's genuine. The next question will be, okay, you found a place to hang the label. But why do you call it real? Aren't all three of them real? If you talk about your psychology, you have now three pieces. And they're all in existence. There's the desire to smoke, the desire not to smoke, and the desire to be a non-smoker. They're all real. Yeah, it's true, they are real. But there's a big difference between first level desires and second level desires. Because first level desires usually are kind of immediate, like the desire for vanilla ice cream, or the desire to get out of the 95-degree sun, or they're simply things you want. On the second level, when you're talking about what kind of person I should be, when you're talking about what kind of psychology I should have, there, what you're appealing to usually is your values and your picture of how the world runs. You're on the level of your official philosophy of life. That's not true in the first level. When a person has a desire to smoke, that's not because of his values, it's not because of his philosophy of life. Indeed, the desire to smoke is against all that. And often enough, there's a first level desire not to smoke, not because of his philosophy of life, not because of his values, just because of immediate consequences. You know, if you want to play on a sports team, at least this was what it used to be. I don't know if you can do it anymore because of wokeness. When I play the football team, you can't smoke. So guys would smoke all summer, and then they would kick the habit and say, because if you go on the team, you can't be smoking. They catch you smoking, they'll kick you off the team. That's immediate. There's nothing wrong with smoking, just going to keep me from something I want. But when you absorb the idea of your health, the importance of your health, and you go through the material that explains to you why smoking is going to endanger your health and shorten your lifespan, and you think, this is a bad deal. This is really a bad deal. I got to get out of this. Then what you're expressing is your values and your picture of the world. Now ask yourself, which is more of your identity, of who you are? Your first level, where you're responding to immediate pleasures and pains? Or your second level, where you're talking about your basic values and your basic picture of the world? Which is more of who you are and what your identity is? I'll give you an example. Suppose the smoker is successful and he kicks the habit and he overcomes the desire, and the desire just fades away. Has he become a different person? Suppose he changes his values. Suppose he changes his picture of how the world works. Has he then become a different person? I think it's much more appropriate to say he's become a different person when he changes his values or his worldview, for example, changes his attitude towards religion, which is a big philosophical change, than to say he becomes a different person because he doesn't smoke anymore, or he's lost the desire to smoke, or, for example, he loses a taste for Turkish coffee. He used to like it, and he doesn't like it anymore. That doesn't make him a new person. Those are first-level desires. Indeed, I think we picture ourselves as, we speak about having a desire. It's a little bit like having a car. It's not me, it's something I have. It's associated with me. Because it's attached to me, I have to interact with it, take responsibility for it, but it's not me. So when we say, when the smoker says, I really don't want to smoke, now I'm putting it in my terms, I would suggest that we shouldn't put emphasis on the word really, we should put emphasis on the word I. I, the I that's my values and worldview, the I that's my philosophy, the I that's my picture of the world, that I doesn't want to smoke. The really refers to the I that's my real identity. That I doesn't want to smoke. Whereas my associated psychology doesn't want to smoke. That's roughly what Frankfurt says. Is it clear what I'm saying, or should I explain it more? So, if that's clear now, by the way, Frankfurt makes a remark. Now, these papers are very old, like 40 years ago. But he makes a remark, there's no evidence whatsoever that any animal has second-order desires. Since there's a whole dreary debate about human exceptionalism, and people, for various political reasons, want to make sure that people aren't exceptional, they're just slightly smarter squirrels, so that evolution can be supported. Any place where you find things that are unique to human beings is worth pointing out. Nothing in animal behavior that indicates that the animal is doing something to change its own psychology. Whereas we have whole industries, vast literature, and schools of therapy, whose business it is for the person to develop a different psychology, different in certain various respects. So now, when we talk about inner freedom, whether you could or could not do differently, here's a suggestion. Why is inner freedom important? Back to the smoker. I really don't want to smoke. I just can't help it. That's a description of pain. That's a description of distress. Boy, I wish I didn't have this terribly powerful desire to smoke. I feel I'm not who I really want to be. I'm not what I picture as a better self. So maybe the problem of losing choice because of inner compulsion, that's a problem when the inner compulsion is forcing the person to go against what his second level desire would be for the situation, the second level desire which reflects his values and his worldview. Then he feels trapped. Then he feels a victim. Then he says with regret, I really don't want to. I just can't help it. And there, when he's really in that position, that means he doesn't have two alternatives. The alternative of not smoking is not open to him. But that's where the problem lies. Let me make one more remark about this structure, how it works, and then I'll push on to the end of what I want to say about this. Let's look at the idea of conflict here. On the first level, we describe the guy as having a desire to smoke and having a desire not to smoke. That's an absolute contradiction. They can't both be true, not at the same time. Either he's smoking or he isn't. One is fulfilled and the other one is frustrated. But if you take the desire to smoke on the first level and you take the meta desire to be a non-smoker, there's a conflict there, but they could both be true at the same time. And here's how. Let's suppose that this fellow joins a group therapy program to work on the problem of smoking. And he pays $100 a meeting. And he's there with, 15 other people. And there's a therapist there to help facilitate the discussion. And they're all talking about their struggles and their successes and their failures and their strategies. And he's sitting there and he's also taking his part and describing, how he's dealing with the problem. Yeah, but he just needs a cigarette, okay, it's the group therapy session, but, and he lights up a cigarette at the group therapy session. Isn't he acting on both desires simultaneously? He's at the group therapy session in order to lose smoking, to lose the desire to smoke, to change his psychology. That's what he's there for, and he's participating in the discussion. So he's acting out the desire to change himself into a non-smoker. And he's also acting out the desire to smoke because he's smoking a cigarette at the same time. So the conflict between the desire to smoke and the meta-desire to be a non-smoker, it's a real conflict. They're in tension. You're struggling, and some things will work for one, some things for the other. But it's not an absolute contradiction like two desires on the first level. So now, the only question will be, what happens when a person is in sync? Now he has gone through the group therapy, and it's been successful, and first of all, he stopped smoking actively, and then little by little, the desire to smoke waned and disappeared, and he has no desire to smoke now at all. By the way, this definitely happens. That happened to me when I was an undergraduate. For a year and a half, I was smoking a pack a day of Lucky Strike cigarettes, which is very bad. Very, very bad. And my parents, Shalom, kept sending me material about how bad it is, and they were very, very smart about it. They didn't confront me about it. We didn't talk about it. They just sent me article after article. And I sort of got, concerned about the thing, but I didn't stop. What happened was I got bronchitis. Well, even if you like smoking or you're interested in it, not when you have bronchitis. That's not possible. And after a week of bronchitis, the question was, shall I go back to it? Which means I wasn't addicted. And I decided not to go back to it. And it wasn't hard. So I wasn't addicted. That was a great blessing, min hashamayim. By the way, in the interim, I also became Shabbos observant. I didn't smoke on Shabbos, and sometimes I didn't light up the New Week cigarette until Sunday morning. So, which again shows that I wasn't addicted. It was probably a social thing more than like a physical addiction. And some people are physically addicted. But since then, smoking cigarettes, So now somebody says to me, well, are you really free to smoke cigarettes? Not a lot. Left to my own devices, I would never do it. Why? Because I have no desire to do it. I also have pledged against it, and I have no desire to do it. So I'm not struggling with a decision between smoking and not smoking. Do I feel imprisoned about that? Do I feel bad about that? Do I feel sort of at a loss about that? Not at all. Because now my first level desires are in sync with my second level desires. What I really want to be is what I am, and nothing's standing in the way of what I really want to be. So somebody says, yeah, but you're not choosing between alternatives. Maybe so. But here, I'm very happy that I'm in a position where all I do is the right thing. All I do is the good thing. So should it be called free will? Well, the way I've described it, there's no external causation. There's just a lack of internal conflict, which one has to overcome and master in order to do the right thing. Here, I think we're up to a kind of tricky, subtle judgment about it, but it's this kind of lack of freedom in the sense of lacking alternatives, where there's no external causation that would have to be ultimately clarified. This is what we have to picture for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's no conflict. There's no possibility of doing anything that's wrong. So that being the case, there's no description of choosing between alternatives, unless some philosophers have suggested maybe you could have two possible alternatives that are exactly equally good. Then from the point of view of goodness, wouldn't make a difference. And then God's goodness wouldn't determine which one should be chosen. I suppose such a thing is theoretically possible, maybe not. These concepts are tricky. But since, as I have told some of you a few weeks ago, and I found in the Ramchal, that what we call free choice for people, is only choice between good and evil, all other things are programmed. Maybe that would apply also to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and there isn't any choice between good and evil, because evil is not possible. So this doesn't detract from his goodness. On the contrary, it's an expression of his necessary goodness. So it's no loss to his perfection that he doesn't make choices between alternatives. For the fourth time, choice between alternatives is just the engineering problem that we have for making sure that we're free of divine causation. Okay? Now, 10 minutes. It's very interesting in the guide, when the Rambam talks about animals. Now, of course, the guide's written in Arabic. I'm reading the Hebrew translation. I think I checked this with Rabbi Mathan also. Animals are described as having will, but they're not described as having choice. In Hebrew, they have rotzon, but not bechira. And I have seen people write in English that Maimonides says that animals have free will, but it's just not true. He's absolutely consistent that the word bechira, whatever the corresponding word is in Arabic, it only applies to people. It doesn't apply to animals. So, do animals act? That depends upon how you use the word action. Animals confront alternatives, and animals typically act in terms of one of them. The fight or flight response, which they associate with people as well, when the animal is under attack, there are two possible responses, because sometimes the animal fights and sometimes the animal runs. So we know that there are two possible responses. But there's no deliberation. There's no position of in-between. No position where the animal could do either one and then determines for itself which one it does. Absolutely no evidence whatsoever of that. So we have, it's like pressing a button on a computer and getting a response. You press the button and the computer delivers you a response, but that's the only response it could deliver. So in that sense, the animal is just a very, very complex computer, not more than that. And that means that only human beings have free will in that way. Now, I mentioned something about the Ramchal, and I want to fill it in now just to end up. In the Derech Hashem, he says, and I mentioned this in the name of a contemporary philosopher as well, that free will requires conflict of motivation. So, for us anyway, that's the engineering problem, conflict of motivation. Therefore, a human being is composed of, at least, there may be other things as well, but a good inclination and an evil inclination. So there'll be conflicting motivation, and then the choice can be made which way to go. Then he says, the source of the good inclination is the soul, and the source of the evil inclination is the body. So that's why we have a soul and a body. That's why we are compound creatures. We're compound creatures so as to make free will possible. The soul has a function of providing good motivation, and the body has a function of providing bad motivation. so that there'll be a conflict and so that free will be possible. So you're going behind the body and soul compound, which is the human being, and giving an explanation for it. Now, having said that, it's very important to appreciate that the way in which the body expresses evil motivation is, how shall I say, it's subtle and it's in a certain sense partial. The evil in the body is a result of moral and spiritual blindness, not a result of dedicated evil. And I'll show you the difference. Let's take hunger. When I'm hungry, I want to eat. And if I eat, then I'll satisfy my desire to eat. My stomach doesn't care whether today is July 16th or whether today is Yom Kippur. Or whether today is Sukkot, when it's a mitzvah to eat in a sukkah. My stomach doesn't care. My stomach also doesn't care whether the sandwich I eat is my sandwich or your sandwich. Was my property or I stole it. It has no interest whatsoever. All it wants is the physical ingesting of that material. So, following the body, which has desires like that, will often lead to bad actions. It will lead to stealing other people's sandwiches. It will lead to eating on Yom Kippur. But the stomach is also satisfied when you eat in the sukkah and you're doing a mitzvah. The stomach just doesn't care. So when we say that the body expresses the evil inclination, what we mean is this. The body left to its own devices, chasing its own goals, will often do evil because it has no sensitivity for moral and spiritual values. That's not the same as the famous verse in Proverbs, Maim Gduvim Yimtaku, that stolen waters are sweet. There, the desire is to have the stolen waters because they're stolen. To have the bad because it's bad. That's dedicated evil. That's intentional evil. It wants it because it's wrong. And there, that we have no compromise with that. We have no way of making use of that. And if that sounds extreme to you, who would want to do that? Who would want something because it's bad? If you're an American, you're really very familiar with this because you know very well you haven't become a mature American adult, especially if you're a boy, unless you have violated every source of authority at least once. Otherwise, you're just a toady. Otherwise, you're just a robot. You're a nobody. You have to cheat on a test, and you have to hit somebody, and you have to steal something from the store. You have to break the laws, speeding laws. Otherwise, you just haven't made it. That's evil for the sake of evil. Violating authority because it's there. I'm going to pull it down. That's a different level of evil. That's not associated with the body. What's associated with the body is moral, spiritual blindness, which then can be overcome. Yeah, you want to say.
So, when you say moral and spiritual blindness, what do you mean by that? Because there are times where you know that this is not a moral thing that you're going to do, but you have a desire to go and do it. Okay,
so now the you that can see that it's a wrong thing to do, that you is the soul speaking. That's where the intellect is. That's where the values are. That's where the understanding of the world is. Right? That's what's speaking. And the desire, depends on what kind of desire it is. But if it's a desire for a cheeseburger, that desire is expression of the body. And if the cheeseburger is made well, like Dovid's in New York, where they make the milk out of soy, it could taste exactly the same. And the body wouldn't care. The body doesn't want milk and meat. It wants a taste. It wants a texture. If it tastes the same, the body is just as happy. Okay, just as a vague association, this was something I learned from Hillary Putnam. It's just curious and a piece of unexpected news, which might be worth knowing. Does a dog have a concept of meat? So when I first read that, I thought, dogs can tell what's meat and what isn't meat. I thought, why not? So he gives the following example. let's imagine a new steakhouse opens in your area, and for the first month they have half price. They want to introduce it to the public, and you go, and you get a steak, and you enjoy it, and then you go back. 6 months later, there's an undercover government investigation, and they publicize the news. It really isn't steak; it's soy. They just process the soy so it has the aroma and the taste and the texture of steak. But it's really soy. Well, you want your money back because you know it isn't meat because it's made out of soy. Could a dog know that? If a dog ate that soy steak, is there any way the dog could become aware that it wasn't really meat? No, because of the dog, meat carries only the sensory qualities. That's all the dog has from the meat is the sensory qualities. That's not the definition of meat. The definition of meat isn't the sensory qualities. The definition of meat is what the substance is. If it grew in a plantation of soy and it didn't grow in the body of a cow, it's not meat. So a dog doesn't have a concept of meat. The concept goes far beyond just the sensory qualities. The body deals with the sensory qualities. That's all it has. That's why it doesn't have any concept of right and wrong, good and evil. It just wants what it wants when it wants it. And sometimes it will be right to say yes, and sometimes it will be right to say no. Okay? Okay. There's no shiur tomorrow, next week on Sunday. That's when the first part of the campaign is taking place.
It was on Monday, though, right?
It should be on Monday, because I think the second one.
I think Tuesday. Oh, no, because Tuesday it's later at night, right? They do it.
And maybe on Tuesday also, yeah.